I know how to fail. I can teach them how to do that. I could engineer failure. I'd invested in over at that time over 125 startup companies, and raised over $1 billion of capital. And I saw this pattern of success and failure. And my book, Nail It and Scale It, is about these patterns of entrepreneurs that have these habits of getting it right over and over again.
Welcome to Sales Founders, a weekly podcast that explores the entrepreneurial journey between seed capital and sales revenue. Join us as we interview VCs, entrepreneurs, and industry experts to discuss their stories, secrets, and strategies to help you conquer the sales gap and generate scalable revenue. Here's your host, Brad Harker.
Hello and welcome to the Sales Founders Podcast. I'm excited today to have my guest, Paul Ahlstrom. He's the co-founder and managing director of Alta Ventures, an early-stage venture fund, and is also the co-author of Nail It, Then Scale It. For more than 30 years, Paul has operated on both sides of the table as a venture-backed entrepreneur. He was the founder of Knowlex, which sold to Peregrine Systems and then to HP, and as an investor. To date, he's raised over $1 billion and directly invested $500 million in more than 125 startup companies. He earned his bachelor's in communications from Brigham Young University and has an honorary doctorate from the Netanyah Academic College in Israel. So my motivation to get Paul on the show was actually based on an event that we both spoke at a few years ago, a startup weekend, and I loved his presentation. He was talking about 3 things you can do to guarantee startup failure, talking about launching your product without a customer in mind, going head-to-head in it with a market leader for the same customers without being better, and scaling it before you nail it, which really draws on his book. And I knew I needed to have him on the podcast. And so as we kind of got into it, realized that we quickly had 2 episodes here. So in this first episode, we're going to talk specifically about those 3 things that you can do. And there's some great stories and examples that he shares. But our story picks up, we're going to get a little bit of his background, and we're going to start just shortly after he had got out of school and was licking his wounds from one of his first significant startup failures.
That restaurant went down in flames, and I went back to California and started a water purification service company while I was healing my wounds from a failed startup.
Yeah.
And while I was doing that, the guy that I started a service company, and the manufacturer of the owner of that manufacturer, the CEO, pulled me in his office one day and he said, "You seem like a really bright young man, but you're not working very smart." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, your business you have right now will never take you where you want to go." And I was making, small, low-end 6 figures at the time, and I thought it was pretty good money for a kid in his 20s. He said, "You have 24 hours in a day. You can build ditches or you can build rocket ships. Wouldn't it be more fun to go to the moon?" And up until that point, nobody had ever given me permission to think big. I felt I was boxed in, and I didn't have the credentials or the education to think outside of a small business that required my own labor. And that conversation with Bob had such a big impact on me that I quit that service project that day. I handed the keys over to the car and to the accounts to my younger brother, and I said, "All yours." And I went back to finish school. I literally quit that day. and I realized that I was thinking small and I was never going to get where I wanted to go, and what in the world was I doing wasting my time? So when I went back to college, I I had taken some time off of school to do this other startup. I was healing, I guess, from my failed startup. And I created a software company that didn't work. And then I decided I didn't know what the heck I was doing. So a friend of mine offered me a job at Folio Corporation. And I had the privilege and honor of working with Kurt Allen and Brad Pello and Mike Wolfgram and Mark Wolfgram, who was the friend who got me into the company, and all the great people at Folio. And it was the first text retrieval engine, and those guys offered me the first product manager position at the company. And I had no real experience. I don't know how I got that job, but that changed my life. So I got to travel around the world with Kurt Allen, who was a true visionary and a mentor. And I spent 4.5 years there as the internet was coming along and HTML, and I got to be in the middle of that industry as it was taking off. And after 4.5 years, I graduated, I guess, and I spun some technology out and created a software company called Knowlex. And I started that in what year was that? That would have been probably around 95 and 96. And I ended up raising venture capital for Knowlex, and we sold it 2 years later to a public company. And I was so excited by that experience, I wanted to go do it again. But I also wanted to help all their other entrepreneurs. So I ended up taking a couple of days off, and we raised a venture capital fund, and I fell in love with that business, and I've raised 8 funds since then. So Knowlex was kind of my launching pad, and Folio was my education, was my university experience, I guess. And in the middle of that, I finally graduated with my undergraduate in communications.
Awesome. And VSpring was was VSpring the first fund that you put together, or was this prior to VSpring?
Yeah. So Greg Warnock was an investor in Knowlex, and after we sold Knowlex, I called Greg up and said, let's go raise a fund. There's not enough capital here in the state of Utah. And Greg was one of the more prolific angel investors, and so he and I drove around the state in his BMW, because he wouldn't drive in my car because I had a Nissan Altima and he didn't want to be seen dead in it. And he said, dude, man, nobody believes you've had an exit. You need to get another car. I said, well, what kind of car would make you happy? So I ended up buying an Audi A8, and he was happy with that. So we drive around, and we met with 140 people to map out the challenges, weaknesses, and opportunities of the Utah entrepreneurial ecosystem, not knowing exactly where we're going to go with this. And we mapped out a strategy after these 140 meetings of a gap that existed in this early stage financing. And these 140 meetings also kind of gave us some street cred, because we had talked to everybody, including the governor on down, about, well, you guys should solve this gap. And so after that, we put together VSpring Capital. And my wife named the fund. We were at our anniversary dinner, and I was stewing over the name. I just couldn't come up with a name. And she said, give me that piece of paper. What are the options? And she circled VSpring. She goes, okay, decision made. Can we get back to dinner?
Oh, my gosh. How many times I've pored over names of companies and spent months, if not years. That would be nice.
So that's how VSpring got named.
Very cool. Very cool. Awesome. Well, let's do this. And obviously, co-author of an entrepreneur's handbook is not, it needs to be punctuated on there as well. It's a fantastic book. I'm sure most of our audience is aware of it or have read it. And if you haven't, shame on you, and go buy it now. I'll put a link in the podcast notes for it. But maybe to shift gears a little bit, one of the things that I appreciate in your approach was when you stood up and said, here's how you can guarantee that you can fail as an entrepreneur. And you identified 3 things, 3 of the most, what I would assume are some of the most common pitfalls. Let's dig into those for a minute. And I'll kind of lead you into the first one. It was launching your product without a specific customer in mind. So give me a little detail. Where did these 3 pitfalls come from, and maybe give me some context into the first one?
Well, I was invited by Derek Anderson to give a speech in Silicon Valley at the annual Startup Grind event. And he says, teach us something interesting. And as I was a little nervous speaking in Silicon Valley with everybody that was going to pontificate on how to go do great things and how to, create a successful startup. Yeah. And I thought, well, I know how to fail. I can teach them how to do that. I could engineer failure. I'd invested in over at that time over 125 startup companies, and raised over $1 billion of capital. And I saw this pattern of success and failure. And my book, Nail It and Scale It, is about these patterns of entrepreneurs that have these habits of getting it right over and over again. But in the cracks are those other patterns, those negative patterns of failure. And so I thought, if I want to be an authority on something, this is something I can speak with with authenticity and conviction. So I went back and looked at the companies that the patterns of failure. And while there are many reasons a startup fails, I found three major buckets that these startups fell into. And so without going into all of the different reasons, run out of money,
Right.
lack of passion, etc. Number one was launch without a specific customer in mind. And we often will build a product idea, we'll get excited about it, but we don't know exactly who the customer is, what is the pain or the problem you're solving for that customer, and the job they're trying to accomplish, and how your product intersects with that particular problem. And so that was a problem that I had experienced, and I continue to experience day in and day out. Is I fall in love with my idea, and I don't think about it in context of who the customer is for that, and then you get blinded by your idea. You can't see the world clearly because you fall in love with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was telling my brother Jason about this, who's a very successful entrepreneur. He's an advisor and co-founder of a company that sold to Snapchat. Anyway, so he's done very successful exits, and he said, this reminds me of the Homer Simpson episode where Homer ends up taking over as CEO of his brother's car company, PM Motors, and he builds the Homer, and so I go and look up the episode of the Homer, and so it's exactly, he builds this car for himself. He doesn't really know who he's going to build it for. It's got a bowling trophy on the front. It has a bubble dome in the back, so you can put your mother-in-law in it and not hear her. It has chrome steps, and it's just this horrific automobile that he built for himself. So and so when I give speeches, I ask people, how many have done this? How many have built a product or a service without knowing who the customer was? And in every single audience, in over 50 keynotes, I have hands shoot up in the air, and people can't wait to share their experience. So I just say, don't do that. Don't build anything until you know who you're building it for. And innovation, the definition of innovation is the intersection of invention. I created a new product, and market insight as to who's that product for and how are they going to use it and position it and pay for it. So you really can't come up with an innovation until you know who the customer is. And every new innovation has a first customer. So anyway, that's just a common error I see among startups. So yeah, that was the first one. The second biggest. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and it's interesting because I think most innovation and most of these ideas, they originate around the pain point. Even if it's the entrepreneur himself that's experiencing it, but it originates around the pain point, and then the business model or this idea, the solution, emerges, and it goes so much further, right? I mean, especially when you start trying to appease capital, or when you start trying to iterate your product into perfection and hoping that it will sell eventually. And this is really what our podcast is focused a lot about, is that sales entry, right? And you get to that point where you think, okay, if I make it better and better and better, and I focus on the solution, eventually it's got to sell. But the further they get away from the genesis, which was the pain point, just like you said, the customer, the more you derail. And it's really interesting, almost a bit ironic that the process can be that big of kind of a mirage that takes you so far off track. But unbelievable how many times personally I have thought of an idea, knew the customer, and then completely departed from that and just said, what's the solution? This is awesome. I can't wait. And
no, I do it all the time. In fact, that was one of the reasons I built the Big Idea Canvas, is because I have to go take every idea I look at, idea we come up with or invest into, and I run it through. And the first questions on the canvas are, who is your customer?
Mm-hmm.
What is the pain they're experiencing? What's the context of that pain? How frequent is it?
Yeah.
What's the level of the pain? And basically come up with a monetizable pain score for a specific customer, and then work out from there.
So important. And a very interesting theme, I'll let you get into the second one. A very interesting theme that I've noticed. Your system is very much, it seems very strategic, and it's very process oriented. But there's one common theme.
That's very observant. I'll come back to that. Go ahead.
But there's one common theme in it that I've noticed, and maybe I won't give it away yet. I mean, we know what it is. It's you find a way to integrate the most important feedback throughout that process, and it's the customer. And I've noticed that through every stage of the Nisi model, it's always coming back to this validation to the people that matter the most. But
yeah, it's a simple idea that we as entrepreneurs fall in love with our ideas. We get away from that, and we sometimes treat the customer as an enemy that's too stupid to get it.
Yeah.
And so and the other interesting thing I noticed around the book was all the books I had read up until that point, 100% were entrepreneurial success stories with stories and principles of how they did it, but there was no process to it. And I was hungry for a step-by-step manual. How do I get from A to B?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm tired of failing, and I want to increase my odds. So yeah, we can't guarantee our entrepreneurs can be successful, but can we significantly reduce the percentage of failure? Can we increase the odds of success? And that's was the attempt in the book Nail It and Scale It. Is here is a process that we've observed hundreds or thousands of entrepreneurs have gone through. And then I did my observation, and Nathan Furr did his doctoral research on this, and he brought in his research and case studies that collaborated with my street smarts,
mm-hmm.
or my street experience. I call it my street MBA.
Mm-hmm.
And so that collaboration between the book learning and the research and then the street learning, the observations, was this kind of partnership with Dr. Nathan Furr, who without him, there's no way I would have written the book. It would still be a PowerPoint that I continue to give, but Nathan helped me pull it out of the PowerPoint and into the real world, and added an amazing dimension to it. Brilliant guy.
Awesome. Okay, number 2.
Well, one of the second most common ways to fail is based on your market entry strategy. It's going head to head with a company, a market leader, and going after that same customer without being significantly better. So one of the most common questions that I get is what should be my market entry strategy?
Mm-hmm.
So the best way to enter a market is to disrupt. And disruption means going after, in my definition, it's a very overused term, but it's going after an underserved, unloved piece of the market, coming from the bottom and coming up. So there are several ways to enter the market. You can go create a new market. So go after greenfield or blue ocean opportunity and go create a new market.
Yep.
You can extend that market. You can 1+ it, add features to it. That's what companies need to do. This iterative innovation, this ongoing process improvement. So you stay in business, you stay ahead of the competitors. They call it incremental innovation.
Mm-hmm.
I've identified a new type of innovation that I thought was new, but it's not really that new. I call it 10x. Disruption comes from below. It's like Snapchat taking on Facebook, or Instagram taking on Facebook, where you go after an unserved customer. When Facebook expanded beyond the college and high school market, they went after the parents. The kids no longer wanted to be on Facebook, because the last place they wanted to be is in a room where the parents looking over their shoulder. And so as the parents got on, the kids got off. And so it created new opportunities at the low end of the market. So when Instagram and Snapchat came along, I didn't get it. I didn't understand why you would ever want 8 seconds of disappearing text. Well, the kids wanted their own private space. It's like when I was a teenager, I wanted my telephone by myself, and so I would pull it into the cord into the closet or the bathroom so my brothers and sisters didn't hear me. So that low end of the market was looking for something simple, and you're disrupting at the low end. Well, often entrepreneurs, and myself included, will go after the market, and we look at a great market opportunity, and we start competing head to head with existing customer. So we try to copy Facebook or make it incrementally better. And so there are all these um, corpses of social networking companies that don't exist because of their head-to-head strategy with Facebook, MySpace, Friendster, 6 Degrees, The Globe, Path. I mean, it goes on and on. And Facebook won in that segment. But so how do you take on Facebook? Well, you go after an unserved market. And so a couple of guys in a garage created Instagram, and Facebook bought it for $1 billion. And then a few more guys in another garage in Southern California created Snapchat. They're now worth $15 billion. And they turned down a $3 billion acquisition from Facebook. So if you're going after a market, don't go head to head with that existing market leader for the same customer. And that's the key thing. The same customer. Go find a new customer. Because that customer is, if they're on that demand curve, then they are effectively, you got to find out, are they really dissatisfied? Because for the social networking example, not only do I have to switch that customer, but you have to switch the entire network, and switching costs are very high. So it's much easier to go after an non-consumption than consumption. So find non-consumption on that next market that should be jumping on that curve, and go satisfy them. And then as you satisfy the non-consumption and that market grows up, that will eventually grow up and niche the market just above it. And that will create a significant merger or acquisition opportunity for you, as that company up above will want to buy you, like Instagram.
Yep.
Or you can compete with them because now you have something that's better than the previous market, and you niche them and you move beyond them. And so this is the work that Clayton Christensen has done in his seminal work, Innovator's Dilemma. And we were just observing the actual day-to-day implementation of that theory. So one of the companies that breaks that theory is Tesla. Tesla is going after the same customer, and they're shifting people away. And another company that broke the theory is the Nest home thermostat,
right?
Because it was going after the same customer head to head. And what I found is that technological innovations can shift people away. So Clayton Christensen used to say in his speeches, pray for Tesla because they're breaking his theory. But what was happening was Tesla wasn't really going after it. While it was going after the automotive industry, what they're really going after was an entry into a bigger trillion-dollar industry, the energy industry.
Right.
While Nest was going head-to-head with Honeywell for the home thermostat, the home automated thermostat was an entry point into home automation. That's why Google paid several $billion for the company, because it was an entry point for home automation. It was just a simple thermostat. So if you drew it on the home automation curve, then this thermostat was a low-end entry point.
Yep.
And so anyway, so it's kind of an interesting way to think about that.
And the key too is the word you use, niche, right? I mean, I think there's too many entrepreneurs out there that say, you know what, this is a huge market, and if I can just tap into 0.005% of it, I'll be a multi-millionaire, right? Yeah. And that there's nothing appealing about that, and they eventually figure that out. And you know, when you get niched, and even if you are in that industry, like you say, but you find that little corner of it, it's amazing. It seems like the riskiest strategy, you know, to say, oh, I'm gonna alienate all of these people. I just want these people, and everybody would tell you you're crazy, but only then do you have the differentiation where you can go and say, I am the expert here. I am the guy that understands this better than anybody else. And here's why this is so important to add to, you know what I mean? And it just, that level of focus changes everything.
Well, disruptive ideas often look like stupid ideas. Yep. Because remember, the existing market is on their well-served demand curve. So look at the idea for Airbnb. It looks like a stupid idea. You picture a guy asleep on your couch. And I got this great idea. I'm going to rent couches to people. Rent my couch out. So it feels like a stupid idea because the current market is well served on their hotel demand curve. I enjoy staying in a hotel in a nice bed. I don't want to go stay in a stranger's sofa couch.
Yeah.
And the idea for Pinterest feels the same way. I've got this great idea. Let's go take all those pictures for our wedding that we have on the cork board in the house, and let's go put them online and share all these photo collections with my friends online. They initially feel like very stupid ideas. And Pinterest has become the fastest growing social network by far, followed by Tumblr, followed by Instagram, followed by LinkedIn, followed by YouTube, followed by Twitter, followed by Google Plus, followed by Facebook.
Yep.
So Facebook might be large, but in terms of growth of members and active users, the growth in active users, they're down.
Mm-hmm.
Pinterest is scaling, membership growth is growing 50% year over year, and Facebook is 1%. So, and so they have to go acquire. So anyway, that those niches feel stupid. And if you haven't a really dumb idea, you might be onto something.
Right. I mean, that's the thing I'm just sitting here thinking to myself is so many times where I'm like, I thought of that. I experienced that pain. Man, how did they beat me to it? But there is no question that at some point, A, the idea seems stupid, or B, that barrier to entry of being able to take that idea that you had and being able to convert it into a viable product or service that you can take to the market and gain traction is the other side, right? It's the gauntlet, and is probably a good segue into number 3, which in your presentation is scale it before you nail it. That is where things really become difficult, and I think what scares most people away from entrepreneurship is how do we approach that? An idea that you say, what is the process that I can start to go through to take this concept and see if this is a possible business?
Yeah, that's a fabulous question. Backing up a little bit on the scale it before you nail it, this was the number one cause of startup failure. And as we looked at the data, we did our own data analysis, and then there was like a startup DNA genome project in Silicon Valley that Nathan Furr was advisor to, and we found it was the number one cause of startup failure. You could call it another name: doing good and obvious things out of order,
mm-hmm.
hiring the VP of sales before you have something to sell, building your product before you have a beta, building your beta before you have an alpha, building your alpha before you have a virtual prototype. Basically doing good things, but doing them out of order. And what happens to the startup is they are taking on additional extra costs and premature scaling and burning through their cash. And the reason that's bad is because by the time you get through a certain amount of cash, your company should be worth more than the cash that went in.
Right.
Call me crazy.
I don't know about that one.
But we found that when we put too much money to work before we nailed the customer value exchange or product market fit, then that companies were often not worth the money they had gone in. So now they're trying to raise another round. And everybody is around the table looking at themselves and saying, this thing's not even worth $10 million. We've raised 15.
Right.
It's not worth 5. And so you have a damaged cap table and a dead company. And so my thesis is starve the startup before you nail your customer product market fit. Make sure you get it right. Because when we have too much capital, human nature is we're going to solve our own problems because we can, and we will justify it 20 ways from Sunday because we're not stupid. We're smart people. Our investors we have investors from Kleiner Perkins.
Right.
They're not stupid. They're here watching me, and so you feel like you have validation because you have smart investors and advisors around the table, and we continue to fall into these traps of premature scaling. So that aha moment was what drove the strategy for the book. And there's many examples from Cosmo to Webvan in the book about premature scaling. And there's many examples of companies that have done it right. And I love Ryan Smith and what he's done with Qualtrics. He got his business to half a billion valuation before he raised any outside venture capital. So so the process is that we've observed is, as you talk about the sales process, is you basically bring the sales up front in the process.
Yep.
You bring the customer up front and you have a sales conversation with the customer around an idea. You don't make it too rigid, because you're gonna have to let go of your idea and adapt a new one. You're gonna be iterating. So you take the hypothesis and you bring it up front in the process. And my favorite hypothesis formula was generated by Jeffrey Moore, who was a great person. And I got to meet Jeffrey and actually hired him several times when we were working at Folio Corporation. So Kurt Allen and I got to spend a lot of hours with Jeffrey Moore. And he has this hypothesis that he generates for startups. It says, name your customer, that have this, name your problem, we do this, name your solution, unlike, name your competitor, we have these benefits, name your benefits. Mm-hmm. And he generates a hypothesis that you can then go, and there's examples of one that I use for Nolix in my book, for customer help desk representatives that ... So when I was judging a business model competition at BYU, there's this high energy team that was about to win the local competition, or was one of the top contenders, that had come up with an idea called the bed sled. And this is a product I would definitely use. It was a big air mattress with handles on it that you would ride down the snow in. So a group of you could get basically in an air toboggan. But I didn't think this was going to be a scalable venture-backed startup. And so the question I asked was, how did this idea, which I love it, but how did it get all the way through the process to a global business model competition and about to be in one of the top contenders? And that question bugged everybody around the table. We didn't focus on the quality of the idea. We didn't have a hypothesis to test and all these other ideas. And so that drove the creation of the Big Idea Canvas to help me and other entrepreneurs make sure that if we're going to work on an idea, that this is an idea that I want to spend the next 3 to 5 of my years of my life working on. Does it pass the who cares test?
Yeah. And
if not, kill it quickly and move on. And so we've run now global big idea competitions, and it's really the very first step of the process. You wake up in the middle of the night, think you have a genius idea, stop, go to the Big Idea Canvas, fill it out, and walk around your idea and create a hypothesis, because the output of the canvas, it's a hypothesis generation tool. And now that you have your hypothesis, then go run that hypothesis through the nail it and scale it process.
Yeah.
Go have a conversation with a customer up front and see if they think your idea is as cool as you do.
And see, that, Paul, is the intimidating part for a lot of entrepreneurs who are hoping they can innovate themselves out of needing to be a salesman, right? And
that's what stops everybody. You're right, because most of us aren't salesmen. We're afraid, and that fear would do anything to stay inside the building. We don't want to get out of the building and go talk to anybody. I don't want the rejection, and I do not want you to tell me my idea is stupid.
Right. But see, for me, that's, I've been in sales for my entire career and honestly never identified as a salesman, and have done everything I can to find the most organic and natural style of salesmanship possible, because I hate those same things. I don't think very many people like that.
But what is sales? It's discovering
exactly
a customer's needs and seeing if what you have meets those needs. It's just a conversation.
It's exactly right. And what I think is beautiful about the Big Idea Canvas and the Nail It and Scale It model is that you create a procedural system that doesn't seem like it's selling, but it's forcing them to experience and adopt the sales mindset or the sales process relative to their business early enough that they can build something that sells not something that works, right? And that's, I think, what's beautiful about maybe perhaps one of the big gear shifts that I think a lot of entrepreneurs need to make is embrace sales earlier, but just understand it for what it really is and kind of get rid of those preconceived notions that this is this scary animal that you should never even approach, and enjoy the process of exchanging value and ideas.
I love that. I love how you describe that. Framing it differently can take away some of the fear.
Yeah.
I am going to go have a conversation with people that could benefit from this amazing world-changing idea. And I want to understand who they are and uncover their needs to a point to see if what I am delivering to them could meet these needs and change their world. And so that conversation is critical to unlock the value of your idea and get it into the hands of them, because you can't shove this blob into their hands until you've refined it to a point where they can use it.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Founders Podcast. Check us out at salesfounders.com to learn more about our products, our services, and access to show notes and offers from our guests. Don't forget to subscribe to the show. Also, feel free to share episodes with anybody in your world that needs to hear the message. And please reach out to us with any suggestions for topics, guests, or ideas that we can consider for the show. We appreciate your support, and we look forward to talking to you next week.